All right. Hey, everybody. This is Paul. Thanks for taking time to check out our live online broadcast. So today is Sunday. It is April 6th, and we're ready to get started. You can see the slides that Conrad has up on the screen tonight where he's going to be covering search and rescue. Before we get started, there's just a couple of things that I wanted to mention. So I see that there's a bunch of people that have just jumped on the page at the Hangar website, hangar.com. And I want to let you know that if you move your cursor over the video as it's playing, you'll see that there's a YouTube icon in the lower right-hand corner. And if you click on that, that will redirect you over to the YouTube page where you can check this out on the YouTube page that we're live. There's a chat feature on the right-hand side. So if you want to say something as Conrad is doing the teaching, you can chat in the chat feature. And if you have any questions as Conrad's going through things, you can put your questions in there. This recording is going to go into our membership area with all the other past online broadcasts that we've done. So if you're interested in checking out any of the past recordings, or if you want to see this recorded video once it's all set, you can check out the Hangar membership area on the Hangar website for that. I think that's all that I wanted to mention right now, Conrad. I know we have a few questions that have already came in. So once you finish this search and rescue presentation, then I know you're going to move over and cover some of the questions that we had that came in. And for any of you that are listening live, you can type in your questions into the chat feature, but you'll also have a chance that we'll put up the phone number on the screen. And once Conrad's ready, he can open up the phone lines. And if you want to actually talk to him directly, if you have more of a complicated question, that's a good opportunity to be able to call in. So you can type in your questions into the chat feature, or you can wait to the end and actually call in and talk to Conrad directly. And I see John's just said something into the chat window. So hi, John. Thanks for sending in a question. I know that you sent in a couple of questions already. Looks like a few other people are starting to type into the chat feature. So as things get started here, I'll look over things in the background and just check and make sure that everything's working well, Conrad, but I can pass over to you. You can get started whenever you're ready.
Well, hey there. Good evening, everybody. And thanks for taking the time to check out our online broadcast. This one is related to search and rescue, which is probably a topic we don't talk about enough. I guess maybe we're all trying to avoid the idea of needing to be rescued or looked for, but it is an important topic, and we're going to cover some of the basics that everybody should know, and also some stuff that could be important when you're taking a written exam. So what we want you to think about is, in the event that you have, let's call it an unscheduled landing, you end up someplace you didn't expect to be. You're going to need someone to know that you're missing. So we'll talk about that. Ideally, you're going to be trained and ideally these people are going to be trained and equipped to find you, and they're going to be trained and equipped to render aid. We have such a system in Canada. So one of the things that you need to know, basic sort of pilot information, who is responsible for search and rescue in Canada? And in the search and rescue world, they use the acronym SAR, okay? Search and rescue. So in Canada, it's the Canadian Forces that is responsible for search and rescue involving aircraft. For boats, it's primarily the Coast Guard, but in Canada, for aircraft, it's the Canadian Forces. And as you can imagine, all of this might take a lot of coordination. You're not just going to launch search aircraft with no forethought. There are 3 Joint Rescue Coordination Centers, or JRCCs, across Canada. We're loading you up with acronyms tonight. The JRCC is responsible for coordinating military and any civilian assets. So civilian assets in this case will normally mean civilian volunteers. In many cases, they're going to engage the CASARA people. And we'll talk a little bit more about them. So depending on where you live in Canada, these are some handy phone numbers. So if you want the JRCC that's responsible for essentially the West Coast, British Columbia, and the Yukon, here is the toll-free number, but also the non-toll-free number, and they will accept a collect call for search and rescue. So if you're talking to them on your satellite phone, and you want to send you want them to accept a collect call, they're not going to say no, we don't accept collect calls. As long as it's got something to do with search and rescue, they're going to um, accept that. They also have this handy feature that if you do pound SAR or pound 727, that's also going to work. So that's some pretty handy information if you or anybody that you've maybe designated to activate search on behalf of you, if say you're on a flight notification, these are all handy things to know. Now, for a big chunk of the country, searches are coordinated through Trenton, Ontario. So look at the size of the area that these guys are responsible for, right? Alberta, Manitoba, Northwest Territories, Western Nunavut, Ontario, Western Quebec, and Saskatchewan. And again, the toll-free and non-toll-free telephone numbers that if you are located in that area, you probably want to program these into your phone. And then for the eastern part of the country, searches are coordinated through the JRCC located at Halifax. And that's for the places that you would expect: New Brunswick, Newfoundland and Labrador, Nova Scotia, Eastern Nunavut, Prince Edward Island, and Eastern Quebec. And again, a toll-free number and a non-toll-free number, a local number. Interesting that neither one of these, neither Trenton nor Halifax has the pound feature. So here's the map that shows the search and rescue areas. I mean, the provinces are pretty easy, but how do you decide whether you're in the eastern or western part of Nunavut? And this is how you tell. Okay, so in the event that you need search and rescue service, it's kind of handy to know what's available. The Canadian Forces search and rescue units are equipped with helicopters, makes sense, and fixed-wing aircraft to search. And the JRCC is going to coordinate any local police, it might be the RCMP in many parts of Canada, Coast Guard, Parks Canada wardens, if you happen to, go down in a national park as appropriate. And they're also going to engage the civilian volunteers. So you can imagine that this is an organizational, I don't want to call it a nightmare, but it's certainly an organizational challenge to make all of this work. And they do it very, very well. Now, the Canadian Forces search and rescue units themselves employ rescue specialists that go by the acronym SARTech, Search and Rescue Technician. And these people are amazing. They can parachute into a remote area if required. I've seen pictures of them parachuting into the water if required. And they can offer essentially basic medical aid and any other support. So very well trained individuals, very motivated to do their job, and they'll jump out of an airplane or a helicopter to come and help you. Pretty fantastic. So those are the services available. Now, one of the things that you need to be aware of as pilots, and this is basic pilot knowledge, is what's going to start a search? What's going to trigger a search? Well, the primary means is if an ELT, an emergency locator transmitter, goes off. We'll talk more about those in a little bit. But another way that's common is if your aircraft is overdue on a flight plan or a flight itinerary. That's why we file flight plans, right? That's why we leave flight itineraries. A secondary means is where the JRCC gets notice from an operator or an owner. So, maybe an operator is just worried about, when we say operator, in most cases, we're talking about a commercial operator, or an owner is simply reporting that, hey, this aircraft didn't arrive. We're kind of worried about it. And then the other one is air traffic control or ATS. So if they were to, for example, lose radio or radar contact, that may trigger a search. So these are all ways that the system can be employed, so we get started looking for you, hopefully while you're still around to be looked for. All right, let's talk a little bit about ELTs. And again, a lot of us fly around with ELTs installed in our aircraft and don't really know a whole bunch about them, right? We know for aircraft owners that we got to get the thing recertified every year, but maybe you don't know much more about it than that. What it does is it sends an electronic signal that can be tracked. So this makes it much easier for you to be found if you have an active ELT. And really, if you think of the size of Canada and how small an airplane is, this really does increase your chances of being found, especially if you crash in a wooded area. Now, ELTs are designed to activate automatically. They use a G switch. So essentially, any hard impact is going to set them off automatically. Probably some of you have done a hard enough landing that you may have done that. This is a good reason to check your ELT after you land, even if it wasn't particularly hard. And as pilots, there's essentially three things that are really important that you know how to do. So you got to know how to test your ELT, you got to know how to operate your ELT, and you got to know how to monitor for ELT signals. Now you should know that all ELTs are not the same. They should be by now, but they're not. The legacy ELTs, and there's still a few of these around, so we still talk about it, even though we're all supposed to switch to the newer model. These transmit a signal on the emergency frequency, 121.5, and also the UHF emergency frequency, 243.0. And it's an analog signal. Now, the great part about this is that 121.5 signal can be tracked by search and rescue personnel. They have equipment that allow them to home in on that. And until 2009, they were also tracked by satellite. So one of the issues with a legacy ELT, and another reason to upgrade, is that these things are no longer tracked by satellite, which again is a quantum leap in your ability to get found. The second generation ELTs are the only ones that are sold now. They're really what everybody should have moved over to. This sends a digital signal, which means it can transmit encoded data. What kind of data? Well, it's all kinds of stuff like the aircraft registration, contact information, all that kind of stuff is sent up to a satellite. This is why if one of these is activated, your phone's probably going to ring. So hopefully that helps you get found. But these are tracked by satellite, so we get an idea where you are. Simultaneously, they transmit on 121.5. So it's a 406 megahertz ELT. That's the sort of the satellite part. The 121.5 part is so that other aircraft can hear it, and also it can be tracked using the tracking equipment that the Canadian Forces uses. So it's a sort of a dual purpose. The 406 signal is going to give an instant location. It's just going to do that. It's in the blink of an eye. It uses a satellite. You'll know exactly what aircraft it is because the 406 megahertz ELT has to be registered with the JRCC. So, like if you change ownership of the aircraft, one of the things you have to do is contact what they call the beacon registry, right? Make sure that you've got the right information on there. If you import an aircraft, you've got to contact the beacon registry to make sure that they know what the registration of the aircraft is. And you're going to get an email, sometimes a text sent to if you're the owner or the operator. The 121.5 signal, as we already said, can be used to aid in the search because it can be tracked by search and rescue personnel, both flying aircraft. Even the volunteers can have equipment to track this, or even on a ground search. So, it's just going to make it that much easier to find you. Imagine trying to look for a little tiny airplane in, a large forest, Algonquin Park in Ontario, for example. The other thing is that aircraft that are overflying and monitoring 121.5, which we encourage you to do whenever possible, will also be able to hear the ELT. Air traffic control very often can pick up an ELT signal, depending on the location of their antenna and where the aircraft is. But 121.5, you'll hear the very distinctive tone. So one of the things that, again, we all need to know, and, great exam question stuff, what happens if there's an inadvertent activation of your ELT, your 406 megahertz ELT? And the answer is it's going to send the signal, the JRCC is going to be notified, and the owner operator is going to get an email. So if it was inadvertent, in other words, you maybe had a firmer than normal landing, or a little bit of finger trouble where you accidentally turned it on, there's no way to sort of unring that bell, right? This signal is going to go out and it's going to be fine. You're just going to contact you're going to talk to the JRCC or send a text or email back saying everything's fine. It was a, false alarm. Now, it's important that every once in a while you test your ELT, and how you test it depends on if it's a legacy unit or a second generation unit. But whatever type of ELT you have, your tests should be conducted during the first 5 minutes of any UTC hour. I find it really funny that they wrote it this way because they could have just said the first 5 minutes of any hour, right? But specifically UTC hour. And the ELT should not be operated for more than 5 seconds. And in fact, you're not going to have to. You're going to turn it on, listen to the tone, turn it off. If it is a legacy ELT, first of all, get a new one. But if what you have right now is a legacy ELT, you're going to listen on 121.5. Your own receiver may be used, but another one that's about a half a kilometer away is actually better to check the power output. Turn the ELT on, reset it to the arm position in less than 5 seconds. Remember, the arm position is the one that activates the G switch or puts the G switch on standby. And verify the unit is off by listening to 121.5. Okay, so we're going to turn it on, we're going to listen on 121.5, and then back to the arm position. Second generation ELT is not much different, but these ones have a test feature. So what's going to happen is it's going to send a test signal to the satellite. So you'll get an email, but instead of them thinking that you've crashed, What the test signal is going to verify is that you're testing the ELT. And you'll also get a tone that activates on 121.5 megahertz, and you're going to verify that the unit's off by, again, listening to 121.5. So a little bit different procedure. The second generation units have a dedicated test feature. So one of the questions that comes up all the time is, if you do happen to have one of these unscheduled landings, so for the purpose of this, we'll call it a crash landing, your ELT is probably going to activate because it's designed to do that. But turn it on anyway, okay? And do not delay activation. Do not turn it on and off to save the battery. Remember, especially the second generation ones, we're tracking this with a satellite. And if you turn it on and off, you're just going to frustrate anybody that's trying to track to your location as part of a search. So just leave it on. Now, the other part that's important is remember that it's easier to find an airplane than to find people, especially when you're searching from the air. So they're going to look for the airplane. They're going to assume that any people that are remaining are going to be near the airplane. Do whatever you can to make yourself visible. So consider, fire, smoke, so it would be helpful maybe to have something with you where you could start a fire. You can consult the Canada Flight Supplement for the proper ground to air signals. So that stuff is in the emergency section of the Canada Flight Supplement. That's whether you've got the paper copy or the digital copy. Somebody did point out to me that one good thing about the paper copy is you can use it to start fires. Try doing that with an iPad. But anyway, the point is you want to do everything you can to make it easy for you to find. Stay with the airplane. Consider starting a fire or creating smoke, and look at the CFS for the ground to air signals. So these are things that very often you can create an image on the ground that means certain things. Now, as far as the monitoring and maintenance, so before and after each flight, you want to monitor 121.5. Just make sure you didn't set the thing off. Ensure that you leave the ELT in the arm position, because that means the G switch is active. And make sure you maintain it in accordance with the manufacturer's requirements. Part of those maintenance requirements are that your ELT is going to need an annual function check. So essentially, you're going to take it to somebody who is authorized to do these function checks. They're simply going to check that the ELT is putting out a signal, that it's on the correct frequency, and that it sounds the way it's supposed to sound. As far as the batteries go, those vary from unit to unit, and they're going to be replaced as per the manufacturer's requirements. So a lot of ELTs require an annual function check, and the batteries changed every 24 months. Your ELT should have enough battery to operate for 24 hours straight before the batteries go dead. That's like part of the function check. Now, another question that comes up both practically and on written exams is, can we fly if our ELT has been removed for maintenance? And the answer is yes, you can. Certain restrictions do apply, but you really should consider that safety is greatly reduced without an ELT. So, maybe if your ELT is out for service, maybe this is not the day you choose to fly up the Alaska Highway or in some remote area. So if your ELT becomes unserviceable, or maybe you're just having it, pulled out for annual maintenance, you can operate for 30 days without one. You must remove the ELT at the first aerodrome available for repairs or removal. So if it, becomes unserviceable while you're on a trip, take it out the first aerodrome where we can get available repairs and removal, promptly sent to a maintenance facility, and we have to placard the airplane saying the ELT has been removed and the date of removal. So, a placard is usually like a little label or something that says ELT removed on a certain day, and indicating to any pilot that, hey, this airplane's operating with no ELT. That's required. Most mechanics know that. Now, if your ELT is removed for annual maintenance, your aircraft, we say it goes pumpkin, meaning after 30 days, essentially you're grounded, right? Flying schools and other large commercial aircraft do have other allowances, and we're not going to get into all of that. So, if you're out of flying school and they're flying around without an ELT and it's been more than 30 days, they're probably allowed to do that, but there probably are restrictions as to how far away they can go. All right. So that beats ELTs to death. And I will remind you that not only is this good practical stuff to know, but if you're taking a written exam, they do tend to ask those kind of ELT type questions. So we just want to make sure that you're aware of that. Now we're going to talk about things that are not related to ELTs. So, what else can you do to improve your chances of getting found? And, the most obvious thing I think is file a flight plan or the cousin of the flight plan and the flight itinerary. Make sure you amend it as necessary. And meaning, if you're running late, you let FSS or your responsible person know that you are. And especially flying in remote areas where maybe radar flight following is not available, use VFR position reports, right? Flight following works basically the same way. And by flight follow, what I mean is you're talking to a radar controller who's absolutely watching you, right? And there's very little need to do both those things. But in some parts of Canada, flight following is not available, or maybe they're too busy that day. It does happen. So then VFR position reports through the local flight information center are the alternative way to kind of keep people up to date as to where you are. Now, as far as what else you can do to, improve your chances, should you have a series of unfortunate events and end up, parked someplace that you didn't intend to be parked, especially in remote areas, carry appropriate survival equipment. Now, the list of things that you have to have on board the airplane legally is pretty short. So you really want to look at this and say, okay, if I'm flying across a remote area in winter, maybe I should take enough stuff that I can survive in winter. The other thing that is encouraged is that you obtain or carry a survival handbook, and there's all kinds of them out there. And it's probably a good idea to not only have the book, but maybe read the book. And I'm sure there are versions that are online that you can probably get. Of course, the problem with having only an online version is that, inevitably your iPad is going to take the brunt of it in the event of a hard landing. So maybe a paper copy is better. And the other thing you may consider doing is if possible, if it's in your budget, consider taking some formal survival training. Okay, I've had a little bit of this, and it's pretty great, the things that you can learn, especially if you're somebody who spent most of his or her life in an urban environment, and you're not a backwoods camping kind of person. You can learn some valuable skills. Some other things that we would suggest. Again, these are not required, but we have all kinds of satellite tracking devices that you can acquire, and some of these will allow you to send text messages. This type of connectivity is becoming more and more accessible. These are a couple of portable units, but recently I became connected to an aircraft that has this stuff built in the panel. So I can send text messages using my own phone, so this is pretty great. And these are just additional layers of protection in case your ELT malfunctions, because ELT is a electronic device. It can fail. And one of the knocks against ELTs is that sometimes they fail when you need them the most. Well, stack the deck in your favor, and have especially if you're traveling in remote areas, as much technology and as much help as you can to get yourself found. Couple of areas that a lot of people ignore. The Aeronautical Information Manual, which of course is available online for free, so we don't have to buy it anymore, has a SAR section. It's not that long. You should probably read that. And Section F, Emergency, of the Canada Flight Supplement also has search and rescue information that you can bring with you. And I'm still a fan of the paper copy. I get the convenience of an electronic copy, but the paper copy is going to work in the event of a hard landing. And as I already said, you can use some of the pages to start a fire. All right. So that's the end of this part. And I guess what we're going to do is we're going to move on to some of the questions. And of course, if there are any other questions, we're happy to take them. So here's the first question, and I think this relates to talking about uh, airframe icing. And as VFR pilots, one of the types of ground icing that you have to deal with is hoarfrost, and that's simply when the water vapor that's in the air simply turns to ice crystals and adheres to the aircraft. And of course, that's a problem. And this question specifically talks about what do you do if you get it on the underside of the wing. So it typically forms on top, but fuel tanks, for example, can have the right temperature profile where you get hoarfrost not only on the top of the wing but also on the bottom. And this person is asking specifically about the underside of the wing. It's a little bit confusing because this might be permitted if the manufacturer says it's okay to have hoarfrost on the underside of the wing. And I know Boeing on many of their aircraft allow this. But if it doesn't say specifically that it's permitted, it's not permitted. So it is adhering to one of the critical surfaces, because the wing is a critical surface, and you got to get rid of it. So that's your options as far as your options are get rid of it. Now, how you get rid of it, and that may be what this question is about. It might be mechanical means. You're going to rub it off. That doesn't always work that well. It might be adding heat. So sometimes even an engine heater can do that. A lot of times it means a hanger. That's literally what it means. One of the problems with the underside of the wing is a lot of times de-icing fluids, they don't, because it's on the underside, they don't stick that well. But a good shot of hot type 1 fluid will probably do the trick as long as you don't hang around too long. What is the corrective action for porpoising on landing or takeoff? Get a better flight instructor. So porpoising, if in case you don't know what that is, that's when essentially what's happening is the aircraft is kind of bouncing from the main wheels to the nose wheel, to the main wheels to the nose wheel. And the reason they call it porpoising is that the motion the airplane's making is similar to the way that porpoises swim on the surface. So that's where that comes from. And it's almost always caused by uh, too much airspeed and not enough back pressure. So in a lot of cases, if you start to porpoise, maybe the best thing to do is, full power, go around and do it again. But if that's not possible, if you're already in too deep, really what you want to do is you want to get the weight off the nose wheel and onto the main wheels. So, back pressure and get the power off. Um, and try and get a normal uh, main wheel landing. And this is, by the way, this is porpoising is a condition normally with tricycle gear nose wheel aircraft. Um, if it's allowed to continue, you could snap the nose wheel, you could strike the propeller. You don't want to do any of that. Um, and hopefully this wasn't caused by the aircraft not being loaded properly, because that might make it impossible to get the nose up where you want it. But, a go around is a good possibility. Um, Otherwise, you know, cut the power, slow the aircraft down, and assume a normal landing attitude. The appropriate V speed for turbulence. So, that's normally going to be VA, or the maneuvering speed, but some aircraft also have a turbulence penetration speed, and that's just listed in the pilot operating handbook. But the theory is that since the maneuvering speed, or VA, is the speed at which you can exercise full control deflection and not cause structural damage, in turbulence, if the turbulence was really bad and you needed full control deflection to control the airplane, you're not going to break anything. Minimum lighting requirements for night aerodromes. So this normally comes up in the context of, transport has this question that they've had on written exams for many years, and it's actually a pretty good question. And it talks about somebody attempting a takeoff, but one side of the runway has the runway lights covered up, and it's nighttime, but you got a beautiful moonlight and you can see both sides of the runway. So they sort of tempt you. So the minimum lighting requirements are going to be 2 rows of parallel white lights on the runway, and the rest of the night lighting requirements are way bigger than what we can talk about here. So we can talk about taxiway lighting, wind indicating systems, i.e. windsocks, they have to be lit, and all of that kind of stuff. So all of this is contained in part 3 of the CARS. But the common concern here is that you got to have 2 rows of parallel white lights. And if you don't have that, then you can't use the runway at night. And this is not to be confused with requiring a landing light and navigation lights on the airplane, right? This is specifically the aerodrome. Okay, so again, here's one of these sort of I call this a dilemma question. So a particular runway is designated as active at an uncontrolled airport with multiple runways. What is the pilot's authority on runway selection? Well, if you're the pilot, you do have ultimate authority. But where this gets to be an issue is if everybody's using a certain runway, but for example, you're flying an aircraft that requires a longer runway, well, certainly you can do that. I mean, you're going to have to make your peace with everybody else and fit in with the traffic. Otherwise, what's expected of you is that you're going to conform to the circuit and the pattern that's being made by other aircraft. But if you need a different runway for an operational reason, by all means do that. I think where we often get into a little bit of a rub between pilots is when maybe you have everybody using the runway that's directly into the wind, and then somebody wants some crosswind practice, and that does create a conflict. And if you got there and everybody else was using a certain runway, you should probably fit in with that and do your crosswind practice on a different day. But ultimately, you're the pilot, you have the authority. You also have the responsibility to make sure that you're not creating a hazard. Remember, there's always that rule that says you can't operate the airplane in any way that would constitute a hazard, right? So we're not allowed to do that. Okay, those are all the questions that came in. I'm wondering now if we have any from anybody that's out there.
Yeah, we do. Thanks, Conrad. Had lots of good information there. Thanks everyone for sending the questions. Thanks, John, for sending in your questions. And we got a few other questions that came in. And actually, I got an email here from someone who's watching live. It's Di watching live, and Di is actually from CASARA, Zone 2, Manitoba. So
Oh,
it's
there you
great to
go.
hear. Yeah, great to hear right from CASARA as we're doing this live here. And maybe Di is still watching, but Di wrote, thanks for reminding pilots to check 121.5. I am with CASARA, and I have been involved in searches for ELTs that have been triggered accidentally. So we
Yeah,
drop
and
whatever we're doing when tasked by JRCC to search for the ELT, as it might be an aircraft in distress. So checking your ELT has not been triggered. I guess checking that your ELT has not been triggered accidentally is so very important. So please reiterate how important this is. Thank you for this presentation, Di.
well, I think Di did a great job of reiterating it.
Yeah.
And a friend of mine that was involved in Casera talks about the time that they tracked a FedEx van with an ELT in it. And what had happened was somebody was sending it to a maintenance facility and forgot to, turn the G switch off.
Oh boy.
So, so Di is absolutely right. And it's more important perhaps than we think. So thanks for that.
Yeah, thanks. Got a few other comments here. East Coast Aviator wrote in, do you recommend adding a personal, I think you might have covered this, but maybe just touch on it again. Do you recommend adding a personal ELT to your flight bag as a backup?
Yeah. Anything you can do to get yourself found. Um, one of the great things about having one of these personal ELTs is uh, we don't know that in the hard landing, um, we don't necessarily know that the um, aircraft ELT didn't get damaged. Sometimes the antenna gets damaged, so having another one is a great idea. Stack the deck in your favor. You don't want this to be a fair fight.
Yeah, exactly. Good point. And based on that, Levant is here, and hi, Levant. Levant just mentioned that his iPhone in this latest version of iPhone 14 has that satellite capability for rescue built in. Kind of functions like that Garmin InReach.
Yeah, it does. And my phone does that too. I found it works reasonably well. I'm not 100% convinced it works as well as a dedicated unit, but again, why not stack the deck in your favor?
Yeah,
These are all great. And understand here, we're not doing a commercial for Apple, right? We don't need everybody to go out and buy the latest iPhone just for that, but it is a great feature.
yeah, for sure. And relatively new, so good to know. Pass that along. Looks like we
That's
just
a
got
that's a
also,
very that's a very Levant comment.
yeah, very helpful. Thanks, Levant. Appreciate
Yeah.
it. Got another message that just came in from Melissa. So also, Melissa just stating that uh, Melissa just completed her first training mission with CASARA, and definitely great to make yourself as visible as possible.
Yeah.
So it's not easy to spot a small aircraft. So good point, Melissa.
Yeah. Like, I mean, really, we're looking for the proverbial needle in a haystack, and I think a needle in a haystack might be easier to find than an airplane in the boreal forest of Canada, right? I mean,
Right.
the fact that they ever find anybody is amazing.
Very true. I got a comment from Hussein. Hussein just mentioned that he is a aerospace engineer and just starting with his flight training, really appreciating our ground school course so far. Had a question with regards to flares and wondering if it's legal to carry in our backpacks or flight bag for these flights.
So flares generally are considered a dangerous good because they're an explosive. Um, so that's why you don't often see them included in like if you buy a purpose-built survival kit, you're not going to find flares in there. What you're going to find is more like a signaling mirror or something like that. It's a little different than marine where they do use flares. We have specific regulations about carrying explosives, so that is a problem. And the other problem is, what are you going to do if that flare goes off when you're flying?
Good point. Got a comment here from someone who had to leave the class partway through, but really appreciated the first part of the information and mentioned that they're going to see us on Tuesday and Thursday. So, for those of you who don't know, I'll just plop it into the chat window here. Conrad will be doing another Hangar Live this coming Tuesday and Thursday. It'll be focused on aviation weather forecasts and reports. So I put that link. You can check out some more information if you're interested in taking this live class. It's going to be 2 hours each night, Tuesday and Thursday. And Conrad will cover uh, all that stuff that pilot needs to know, whether you're taking the exam, PPL, CPL, IFR, but really just based on taking your aviation weather knowledge to the next level. So if you want to learn more about aviation weather in this kind of focused class, you can check out that link in the chat for more information
For a
about
lot of
that.
people, it's just a reminder, and also, you know, everybody. I know everybody wants to sit down and read all about weather information, but uh, in many cases, there's always something that seems more interesting, right? That's the problem.
Got another question here. Looks like we got a message from Jason. So this is not a flying question per se, Conrad, but Jason, I don't know if you remember a past student mentioning that he started a new job as an FBO ground crew, linesman, aircraft handler, and fueler, and wondered from your perspective, what separates the great ground crew from the merely good ground crew? So I thought it was a really good question that he's asking.
That he may win question of the year.
That's right.
Yeah, that's really good. So, a lot of people listening probably never have had the experience of going to a really great FBO or fixed based operator, where you get your aircraft serviced. But the thing that, and I've been to lots of FBOs. Like, the FBOs of the world are my natural habitat, right? It's where I belong. The really great ones, um, you know, the crew is there when you're parking the airplane. There's no ambiguity about what to do, and really what we appreciate uh, is just somebody to put the fuel in, you know, as quickly as possible. And sometimes we need help with passengers and bags, but it's just the idea that you're going to anticipate what's going on. And a guy that I used to fly with said, it's really nice when you get ground crew that has a yes face. In other words, they're not looking at you like you're a pain, but they're just very eager to help you. Attitude is everything. You can make little mistakes, you can not know stuff, but the really important thing is that you just got an attitude and realize that, especially working pilots, you're just trying to do your job and make it better for your passengers. And if you're not a working pilot, maybe you've got somebody who's visiting the FBO for the first time, or it's a first experience at maybe a big city. Um, Anything you can do to anticipate, what that person might need, is great. Now, I've been to FBOs where the first thing somebody does on a hot day is hand you a bottle of water. I mean, you just appreciate those little things so much. And really it's all about attitude and being willing to help out. And that goes a long way.
Excellent points, Conrad. Thanks. And thanks, Jason. Great question. Really good stuff to be thinking about moving forward with everything. Got a comment question here mentioning that some pilots think that when the ELT is removed for servicing, that a plane or a pilot is restricted in terms of distance. And his understanding is that you can still fly anywhere for those 30 days.
Yep, that's true. Yeah, long time ago, it used to be 25 miles, but the rule changed.
Right.
But maybe 25 miles is a good rule.
Right. Got a comment here from East Coast Aviators. I believe this might be Roy. Just thanking you, Conrad, for taking the time to answer his CFRI question the other
Ah,
day. Just wanted to reiterate his thank you to you for taking the time to help clarify some of those questions that he had.
anytime.
Super. That's good. Scanning through this, looks like Jason was asking some questions about for Melissa, the CASARA, who's the person that was just starting off with the CASARA. Just nice to see the chat window being useful for connecting pilots, so that's great. Thanks, Melissa, for responding to Jason's question, getting some more information about CASARA. Thanks, Roy. Thanks, East Coast Aviator. Just kind of mentioning that, yeah, you were helping him sort out some of those details. And so he's just appreciating that and just mentioning in the chat to other people that you took the time out of your schedule just to chat with them for a bit and answer those questions. So appreciate it, Roy, passing on those thanks. Appreciate it, everyone, with all the questions that you have. It doesn't look like there's any more questions in the chat window. As I check my email one last time, you see the phone number on the screen. If it's easier for you to call, you can do that right now. You see the phone numbers on the screen, 1-844-264-2227. So it spells 184 hangar. If you did have a question that was maybe a little bit more complicated, then you can chat into the chat window. Or if you had a series of questions, be a great time. You can call in now and talk directly to us. I know there's a little bit of a lag, maybe 5 or 10 seconds. So while that's happening, Conrad, I'll give you a chance to have a drink of water, perhaps. And I'll just check the email to see if there's any other questions that came in. All right, so no other questions have come in from the email. We've covered that. Check the window again. It's great to see Jason and just saying thanks, Conrad Paul, taking notes on your advice. Thanks, John, addressing John's questions. So appreciate it, John. Thanks for the good questions that you send in. It doesn't look like anyone's calling, Conrad. So I guess we might be able to say that we can successfully call this search and rescue over, finish this online broadcast. And just one last thing to let everyone know that if you wanted to check out the recording to this or any of the past recordings that we've done, you can check out the membership area at Hangar to get more details on that. If you have any questions that come up later as you're thinking about this, tomorrow, anytime that you're thinking about what you watched tonight, if something clicks in, feel free to give us a call tomorrow, this week, anytime, or feel free to email us anytime, and we'll be happy to get back to you. So, Conrad, I guess I can say that this ends our online broadcast here. Thanks for taking the time to put this all together.
Yep. And I guess, we're always open. So thanks, everybody.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Have a good night. Take care, Conrad. Have a good night.